You have been given wristbands at the registration desk. Please keep them on for the entire day. Do not reserve seats for any participants who did not accompany you to this hall. Seat assignments are done by the volunteers. You have been given notebooks and pens to take down notes of the talks. Please write your name on the notebook, leave it on the seat, and note down your row number when you are leaving the auditorium. The seat is assigned for you for the entire day. There will be a question and answer session at the end of the retreat. If you have any questions, please write them down and give it to the volunteers. These questions will be screened to avoid duplication. When the first talk is over, I will give you further instructions about the tea break. Thank you. Now I will invite Swami Kripamananda to do the invocation and also to introduce Swami Sarvapriyananda to the audience. Thank you.
I would like now first to request Swami Sarvapriyananda to come to the stage and address the audience, and I would like you all to stand up and give him welcome. Please take your seats. Now the Vedic invocation. Shri Gurubhyo Namaha Harihi Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahanau Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om, may Brahman protect us. May it nourish us. May it work in harmony with great vigor. May our study be illuminating. May we not cherish ill feeling towards each other. Om, peace, peace, peace. Welcome you all to the annual retreat of the Vedanta Society of Toronto. As you see, this year's annual retreat is so special. We are so many gathered to hear from Swami Sarvapriyanandaji and on a Vedic topic, Vedanta topic of Dakshinamurti Stotram. And Swami Sarvapriyanandaji, to get him is so difficult. He is so busy. He has to travel a lot in US, in Europe, in India. This year itself, he had to travel to India 3 times so far. Thrice he had to go and come back. So very tiring, very busy, but still he found time for us. We are so thankful to him, grateful to him that he found time for Toronto. Swami Sarvapriyanandaji, you all must be knowing about him. Just a formal introduction. He joined the order in 1994, had sannyasa in 2004, and he worked as a vice principal at Ramakrishna Mission Vidyapith, Deoghar, a very famous school, residential school in India. And after that he became principal at, after sannyasa, he got sannyasa. After sannyasa, he became principal at Teachers Training College at Belur Math. Then he became the registrar of the newly formed deemed Vivekananda University. Then he became Acharya, the teacher, professor in the Provisional Training Center, where he trained the novices, the young man who had come to become monk. He taught them scriptures and other things. He was posted to Vedanta Society of Southern California and Hollywood in 2015, and in 2017 he has come to New York, Vedanta Society of New York, the first center of the Ramakrishna order founded by Swami Vivekananda. It was founded even before the Ramakrishna mission was founded. And Swami Vivekananda himself founded it in 1894. So Swami Sarvapriyanji, head of there, that center since 2017. So I now request Swami Sarvapriyanji please to take the chair and melty, please.
Om Asato Ma Sadgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityurma Amritam Gamaya Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om, lead us from the unreal to the real, lead us from darkness unto light, lead us from death to immortality. Om, peace, peace, peace. Namaste and good morning, everybody. I'm really grateful to revered Swami Kripamayanandaji Maharaj, who's always very affectionate, very loving, very encouraging. Thanks to him and his wonderful team, we have this wonderful occasion. All the arrangements have been made. He reached out to me and he suggested Dakshinamurti Stotra. He said a lot of devotees want this, and I also have heard this a number of times. People have been asking me, why don't you do something on the Dakshinamurti Stotra? So that's why I decided to go ahead and do it this time. It's a favorite of mine. Our Mohan Maharaj is here. He said it's a special favorite, dear to him also. Those of us who have studied it, who chant it, some people chant it daily. So it's a very, very dear stotra, hymn, and very profound. So we'll take that up. Right away, a disclaimer, we are not going to finish it. There are 10 verses in the original hymn. So we'll rather take our time and do the first few verses well, and then we'll take a look at the remaining at the very end. And I think that's better than trying to rush through everything. I see so many familiar faces and so many new ones also. That's always wonderful to see. So, the Dakshinamurti Stotra. It's a hymn of Vedanta. It's both devotional and knowledge. We will look at the Vedanta part of it throughout, but I am aware, and many of you are aware, that it is actually devotionally chanted by many Hindus. And so it serves both purposes. Vedanta, we know, the technical definition of Vedanta is Vedanta Nama Upanishad Pramanam. Vedanta is the source of spiritual knowledge called the Upanishads. The Upanishads are the ground, the root texts of Vedanta. And there are other texts also. The most well-known, of course, most beloved is the Bhagavad Gita. The Bhagavad Gita is one of the foundational texts of Vedanta. But the Bhagavad Gita itself draws upon the Upanishads. Sri Krishna liberally quotes from the Upanishads or paraphrases the Upanishads sometimes in the Gita. And then there's another text, the Brahma Sutras. The Brahma Sutras of Vyasa Badarayana is a part of the Sutra philosophical literature of India. The Brahma Sutras takes up the issues which arise from a study of the Upanishads. So these diverse texts called the Upanishads, if you study them, so we are losing it sometimes, it's dropping a little bit. All right. So when you study them, what happens is you have many questions. what do the terms mean? How does it all hang together? What's the message, the whole message of the whole thing? How do you resolve contradictions? All of these issues are dealt with in the text called the Brahma Sutras. So the Upanishads, Bhagavad Gita and Brahma Sutras, we all know that this is the foundational, textual foundation of Advaita Vedanta. In the tradition it is called Prasthanatraya, a triple foundation of Advaita Vedanta, of Vedanta actually. And then there are commentaries and commentaries written by great acharyas on the Upanishads, on the Bhagavad Gita, on the Brahma Sutras, over a period of more than a millennium. And these have given rise to different traditions, different schools of Vedanta. The one with which we are concerned is the Advaita Vedanta, non-dual Vedanta, which is a very ancient school, but for very good reasons identified with Adi Shankaracharya. He was one of in fact, the first great acharya that we know of, although there were previous commentators, but we know of Adi Shankaracharya's commentaries as the first set of commentaries which is available to us today. So he wrote commentaries on the Upanishads, on the Bhagavad Gita, on the Brahma Sutra and so on. And many, many independent works. The beauty of these independent works, which Shankaracharya composed himself, is that there Shankara has a free hand. Because otherwise when you're commenting on another existing text, you're limited by the original text. So Shankara commenting on the Upanishads or Brahma Sutras or Bhagavad Gita, he has to be confined to what the original text says. But when it comes to books like Atma Bodha, Upadesha Sahasri, and arguably Vivek Chudamani, he has a free hand, so he can say what he wants to say. This is one of those independent works, Dakshinamurti Stotram. It's a hymn, and hymn to Shiva. Shiva is the giver of knowledge. Literally it means the south-facing deity, Dakshinamurti, the south-facing deity, one of the forms of Shiva, the form in which he is gracious, who gives knowledge to us. He always, is depicted in iconography having this mudra, this hand formation. It's called Chin Mudra, the hand formation indicating pure consciousness, Chin Mudra. In fact, if there's one thing that you would like to take away from this whole retreat, this one. You can try it yourself, this one. Just by the way, an aside, I was reading a text on anthropology, and they said we are probably the only primate which has this opposable thumb, which can do this at least easily. And interestingly, that opposable thumb has been crucial to the development of technology, of the use of instruments, early man using weapons and instruments and tools, so on. So civilization depends on this. And often there's something psychological about it also. I've often seen people when they want to make a point, express something, you do this, you do this. But the whole of the Dakshinamurti Stotra can be expressed in this way. How is it expressed in this way? What does it mean? I'll explain later, but to start off, a very brief indication of what it means. These three fingers, they refer to the physical body, the subtle body, and the causal body. And interestingly, each is bigger than the earlier one, showing that the inner ones, the subtle body, causal body, they are more pervasive than the physical body. So you have the what? Phone. It's on what do you call it? Airplane mode. Shouldn't interfere. I'm keeping it far. Now, is this better? All right. Let me know. If we keep dropping, we can use the other hand in his microphone. That would be better. So this is the physical body. And the second one, this is the subtle body. Subtle body means it's nothing very esoteric. All of us right here, who are sitting here, all of us, we have an inner experience. Right now is the physical body which is public. Everybody can see it. That's what the doctor examines, inside, outside. But there's a subtle body. And inner means not inner in the sense of going into the physical body. If you go into the physical body, you will get more physical body. And in fact, the less savory, more gooey parts of the physical body. But inner means inner in our own experience. Inner means inner in the sense of first person experience. All of us, we have thoughts, we have feelings, we have perceptions, we have judgments, we have memory, we have desires, we have enjoyment and suffering, we have the sense of ego, we have the intellect which is trying to comprehend. All of that is called the subtle body, and there are other aspects also, the sensory powers, the prana, all of that. But this inner first person life which we have, that is the subtle body. And there is a seed stage of the subtle body which is called the causal body. So causal body, this one, subtle body, and the physical body. Now, this one, this finger, is supposed to represent the ego or the identification. What do we identify? So the moment we do this, this is our present state, where I, this one, is identified with this, with these three. Right now, we think, we don't even, it's happening again, I think. We don't even think, actually. We take it for granted. We take it, are you sure? Battery is on it? Because sometimes, no. It, yes. Sometimes if the battery is low, this thing happens. So right now we are identified with these three, and automatically so. When you say identified, we think we are the physical body. It sounds abstract. It's much more visceral than that. We are completely convinced. I am this. What is this? I. Who am I? This. So this is represented by this one. And what Vedanta does, it tries to show us, point out, and educate us, and train us to see that we are not these three. These three are there, but we are not these three. I am not the body, not the mind, not the intellect. Does it sound familiar? Mano vadya ahankara chittani naham nacha shrotra jivve nacha grana netre, and so on. So I am not the physical body, I am not the senses, I am not the mind, I am not the intellect, I am not the memory. Why not? We'll see later. But I am not that. And I am something distinct. But then what am I? Apart from all of these, what am I? I am awareness. I am existence. So that awareness, existence, and bliss, awareness, existence, bliss, Satchidananda, which is the formulation of Brahman or the ultimate reality which we get in Vedanta. That one is represented by the thumb, the opposable thumb. The basis of our civilization, basis of being human. Yeah. The opposable thumb, this one, represents our real nature, which is Brahman. And what Vedanta does is, it shows us the distinctness between ourselves and the three bodies, and the identification or the realization, I am pure consciousness. I am pure being. I am pure bliss. The Chidananda Rupa Shivoham, that the last line of that Nirvana Shatakam, 6 stanzas of Nirvana, also composed by Shankaracharya. Again by Shankaracharya. The last line is this. And the first 3 lines are this detachment from these 3 bodies. So Chin Mudra, the auspicious mudra, hand formation, which will be talked about later on, which Dakshinamurti, this is the way the Dakshinamurti teaches. This is the essence of the teaching also. This is the essence of the Dakshinamurti Stotra. This is the gateway to liberation, to enlightenment. You take away anything, take this away. Okay. We'll circle back to that again later on. Now let's go into the Stotra itself. We have been given a handout where the Stotra is there. In the beginning, the first verse which is given is actually, what is called a Mangala Charana, an auspicious invocation, pranam, salutation to the Guru and to God. When this Dakshinamurti Stotra is chanted, there are different versions. What was written by Shankaracharya, as far as we know, 8 verses. But then 2 more are added on at the back and at the end, and a number of Mangala shlokas, invocatory verses, auspicious verses, verses of salutation to Dakshinamurti are added on at the beginning, composed by others. There is one very famous one, which is Ishvaro Gururatmeti Murti Veda Vibhagine Vyomavad Vyapta Dehaya Dakshinamurtaye Namaha. I salute the south-facing deity who is all-pervasive, like the sky, which is one limitless consciousness. And yet, it is experienced. It is, in our lives, we see it as I, the spiritual seeker, and the Guru who teaches me spirituality, and the goal, Dakshinamurti, or as Ishvara, Saguna Brahman, as the Guru, who represents the auspicious, knowledge-giving, enlightenment-giving power of, or grace of Ishvara. And I, the seeker, Ishvara Guru Atmeti. All three are nothing but Dakshinamurti, one limitless existence consciousness. Where's the mic? So we are... That verse has become, yes. Can you hear me now? All right, this is much better. So all three are limitless consciousness, and that's the meaning of that verse. And that verse, Ishvara Guru Atmeti, Ishvara, God, Guru, my spiritual teacher. Guru here standing for the Upanishads, Vedanta. And what's going on here, when you say Ishvara Guru Atma, Atma means self, I, Ishvara, Dakshinamurti, Shiva, God, or ultimate reality, Brahman. And Guru. What's going on here, the underlying subtext is this. For all knowledge, we require three things. The knower, you are the knower. And something is to be known. For example, what I'm saying is the object of your knowledge. And you have an instrument of knowledge, the ears. So, there is the knower, Pramata, knower. And the object to be known, whatever you want to know. Prameya, it means object to be known. And to know that object, the knower has to use some instrument of knowledge. Pramana, instrument of knowledge. So for any knowledge to take place, you have these three. This is a standard epistemological format. To gain knowledge, you need a knower, an object of knowledge, and something that will connect the knower to the object of knowledge. Pramana. So pramata, knower, pramana, instrument of knowledge, and prameya, object of knowledge. You are the pramata, you are the knower. And what I'm saying, my voice, my words, is the object that you seek to know. At least to hear it. And to hear it, you need ears. Basically, of course you need a mic. And you need the mind to be attentive. You need an understanding of language. So many things. But basically, ears are the source by which you hear sound. Now, in this case, who is the pramata, who is the seeker? The spiritual seeker. The one who needs knowledge, us. We are seekers of spiritual knowledge. What's the goal we want to realize? The ultimate reality, Brahman. Here, it is Dakshinamurti Shiva. So Dakshinamurti is the goal, ultimate reality. And how do we know it? The Upanishads reveal it to us. The Bhagavad Gita reveals it to us. Vedanta. So the Vedanta reveals it to us. Vedanta is the pramana, the source of knowledge. Here, instead of Vedanta, the texts, you have the Guru who stands in for that source of knowledge. So actually what is going on here, Ishvara Guru Atma is the, Ishvara is the, what we want to realize, what we want to know. I, the self, am the knower, the seeker. And Guru stands for the source of knowledge, who reveals that truth to us. So the epistemological three things, technically they are called Triputi, the triple foundation of all epistemology. So they are all present here in that sense. Anyway, why I bring it up is, it's a very famous verse. And in all Vedanta classes, it is always brought up, it is chanted, and then Vedanta classes start. Especially in the Uttarakhand, in the Himalayas, when the monks get together and study Vedanta, they will start with this Ishvaro Guru Atmeti. Salutation to Dakshinamurti. But it was not composed by Shankaracharya. It was actually composed by his disciple, Sureshwaracharya. So on the Dakshinamurti Stotra of Adi Shankaracharya, Sureshwaracharya, one of the most learned masters and disciples of Adi Shankaracharya, he wrote an independent and a commentary on Shankaracharya's Dakshinamurti Stotra. That commentary is called Manasollasa, the delight of the mind. Manasollasa. Commentaries also, they have funny meanings. In the names of the commentaries, we have a text, introductory text called Vedanta Sara, which we all study. When we get introduced to classical Advaita Vedanta, we study Vedanta Sara. It's a manual written about 600 years ago. And there are commentaries and commentaries on the Vedanta Sara. So one commentary is called Vidvat Manoranjani, the delight of the learned ones. Another commentary is called Subodhini, easily understood. Easily understood. It's more difficult than the one, which is the delight of. The original text is easy. The commentary makes it more difficult, as the name goes, the delight of the learned. For the entertainment of the learned. It's like, a TV serial for the pundits. And the easily understood commentary, Subodhini, is more difficult than that. And the most difficult commentary on that is called Balabodhini, for explaining to little children. So like that you have Manasollasa, which is a beautiful commentary in verse on Shankaracharya's text, which is in verse, Dakshinamurti Stotra. Just imagine, they are doing precise philosophy, very precise thinking, and yet you have to do it in poetry, in verse, in shlokas. I remember we had this professor who taught us Buddhism, Nagarjuna, Madhyamaka Buddhism, which will also come up in this verse later on, in this stotra later on. Professor Garfield at Harvard University. And at the end of the semester, they will give you an assignment. So he said a 25-page essay on nothingness, emptiness, shunyata. And immediately all the grad students, they will groan and they said, oh, 25, that's too much. Please make it 12 pages, make it half. And writing 25 pages is difficult. Then the professor said, all right, you can submit a 12-page essay, but then it has to be in verse, in poetry. So then everybody said, no, we'd rather write 25 pages in text. So in Sanskrit poetry, this commentary is text were written. So Sureshwaracharya writes a number of verses, on each verse written by Shankaracharya. So that is our primary source for understanding what the subtleties of what Shankaracharya is teaching. Alright, this is the introduction. Most of what I will say is based on Sureshwaracharya's Manasollasa. That verse, Ishvara Gururatmeti, is actually composed by Sureshwaracharya. It is part of the Manasollasa commentary called the Manasollasa Vattika. There are different kinds of commentaries. Bhashya, which Adi Shankaracharya writes, is the primary kind of commentary, where you have the freedom to propound your philosophical view. The same Upanishads, when Shankaracharya writes a Bhashya, or same Bhagavad Gita, Shankaracharya writes a Bhashya, he brings out the Advaitic meaning, non-dual meaning. But when Ramanuja does the same thing from the same text, he brings out the Vishishtadvaitic, the qualified non-dualistic meaning. When Madhvacharya writes a Bhashya, he brings out the dualistic meaning from the same text. Now there are other kinds of commentaries, and one kind is called Vartika. Vartika, which is the form which was chosen by Sureshwaracharya. It is done usually in poetry, in shlokas. And what does the Vartika do? The Vartika explains the Bhashya. So there is an Upanishad, and then Shankara writes a Bhashya, commentary. And on that commentary, Sureshwara writes a sub-commentary called the Vartika. What's the purpose of the sub-commentary? Ukta Anukta Duruktamcha. Whatever has been said, I will explain further. What the master Shankaracharya has said, I'll explain further. Anukta, what he has left unsaid, fill in the blanks. I will fill in the blanks. Durukta, which has been said in a difficult way or controversial way, let us say. I'll try to untie the knot, explain it there. So this is Vartika. And one of the Vartika, that's why Sureshwaracharya in the tradition is called the great Vartikakara. Shankaracharya is called Bhashyakara, who wrote the Bhashya commentaries. Sureshwaracharya is called the Vartikakara, who wrote the Vartikas. And this is one example of the Vartika. In the text which we have got the original only. And then this one, there are other books which have published the Vartika with the translation. So, textual background. This is what we are going to deal with. But really, it's so beautiful. It's so beautiful, this hymn. Elegant, profound, beautiful, sublime. I mean, you can put on adjective after adjective. And one of the reasons why it's so beautiful is there right at the beginning, at the very beginning of it, an example is given. And that example, the city in the mirror, the city in the mirror. The universe is like a city seen in a mirror. And it was very evocative for me. The reason is, when I was a little kid, maybe 9 or 10 years old, my dad used to drive us sometimes from the eastern Indian city of Cuttack in the state of Orissa to Bhubaneswar, where we lived. And in those days, they were dark highways. Now they're all lit up. It's almost like one city, Bhubaneswar and Cuttack. But anyway, we used to drive, and as the car approached Bhubaneswar, so dark all around, and the lights of the city were in the distance. As the car would turn around, in the driving mirror of the car, you would see the city glimmering, shining, twinkling. And somehow, I didn't know what Dakshinamurti Stotra at that time. Somehow that always exercised a fascination. I can close my eyes and recall exactly that, being in the car and seeing the mirror there, and that mirror and the driving mirror everywhere, you can see the lights of the city, and even the buildings in the distance and all. And later, when I read the Dakshinamurti Stotra, that's how Shankaracharya starts. He says, have you seen that? Yes, I said, yes, I've seen that. Well, what you are seeing now, this universe, whatever you're seeing, and hearing, and smelling, and tasting, and touching, and thinking, and understanding, and enjoying, and suffering, this entire universe of experience is like a city in a mirror. Okay, I understand a mirror. That's Bhubaneswar in the distance. This is the mirror in the car. And I understand now this word. But who's the mirror? Here's the word. You're saying this word is like a city in a mirror. Who's the mirror here? What's the mirror? You are the mirror. Atmadarpan. But what you? There lies the crux of the whole thing. So let's start. I'll read it out and translate, and then we'll dive into it. The first verse, arguably the most important verse. Oh, by the way, one more thing. This Dakshinamurti Stotra, as I said, it serves as a devotional hymn. You can chant it, people do chant it out of devotion to Shiva. But it also serves as both an introductory text, introduction to Advaita Vedanta, and as a kind of finishing text also. If you are entering the system, it's good. All the collected teachings, the central points and pointers are all here. And if you have studied, as many of us here, we have been in Vedanta for a long time, many of us, we have been studying Vedanta. If you study the Upanishads or the Bhagavad Gita, you'll find, again, the Stotra, this hymn does a wonderful job of summing up poetically all the teachings there. So both introductory and finishing, you can study it and consider it at any stage of our study of Vedanta. Vishwam darpana drishyamana nagari tulyam nijantargatam pashyannatmani mayaya bahirivodbhutam yatha nidraya yasakshat kurute prabodha samaye swatmanamevadvayam tasmai Shri Guru Murtaye Namaidam Shri Dakshinamurtaye. Those who can sing, very beautiful tunes are there for this hymn. So what does it mean? I'm reading out the translation. I'll read it out from the handout which we have got. The universe is like a city reflected in a mirror, seen inside the mirror but really outside of it. No. It's completely wrong. So let me just read this translation. To him who by illusion of the Atman, as by sleep, sees the universe existing within himself, like a city seen to exist within a mirror as though it were manifested without, not really existing outside. To him who beholds, when awake, his own very self, the secondless. To him who is incarnate in the teacher, to him in the effulgent form facing the south, to him Shiva be this bow. This is also too poetic, the language. I'll explain as we go along. The first thing that we need to know about this verse is that it's advanced. Why is it advanced? For this reason. Advaita Vedanta. The teaching of Advaita Vedanta is very straightforward. You are that. There's an ultimate reality which is existence, consciousness, bliss. You are that. Tattvamasi. You are that. The realization is Aham Brahmasmi. I am Brahman. I am existence, consciousness, bliss. Chidananda Rupa Shivoham. I am Shiva. My real nature is Dakshinamurti. So that's the essence of the teaching. Now, in order to realize that, one needs to go through two levels of analysis. One level is to realize that I am not what I thought I was, body, mind. To step back from that into my real nature as pure consciousness. So, for that first stage, Shankaracharya here assumes that stage has already been done. The groundwork of Advaita, the basic breakthrough, he sort of assumes it's done. He starts at the level of completion, at the level of non-duality. So what does it mean? It goes like this. First, in Advaita Vedanta, we are asked to consider how we are not this body, how we are not this mind. There are multiple levels, multiple methods of this analysis. Some, like for example, Drigdrishya Viveka, the method of the seer and the seen. Or like Panchakosha Viveka, the method of the 5 levels of the human personality, 5 sheets of the human personality. Or the method of, very well known, which is indicated in this verse, Avasthatraya Vichara, inquiry into the 3 states of the mind, waking, dreaming and deep sleep. All of them accomplish the same thing. What does the method of Drigdrishya Viveka? I will not go into that, then the whole retreat will be about that. What does the method do? It shows us that basically whatever you experience, you are not that. Whatever we see, we are not that. Whatever we hear, smell, taste, touch, we are not that. Those are objects. They are things. Like this is a thing. I can see it. I can touch it. So there's a thing, and I am not it. I am the one who knows it, who experiences it, who sees it, or touches it, or hears it. And in that way, we will see that the body is also something that is seen. It heard also. If you're hungry, the stomach will be rumbling. You can touch it, smell it, taste it. The body is an object to all the senses. You can think about it also. So the mind and the senses can all objectify the body. Therefore, I am not the body, because I am not an object. I am not a thing. I am the subject. In this way, we look at the body, we look at the mind, thoughts, feelings, emotions, which we are very closely connected. And when we see that we are not that also, even which was most intimately felt to be ourself, is also an object. Thoughts also. You introspect. You are aware of your own moods. You're aware of your own thoughts. You're aware of your own pain and pleasure. If it hurts, you know it hurts. Who else knows? Only you know. So even the mind is object. Body is object. And I am the experiencer of those objects. But then what am I? If I'm the body, it's easy to point out what I am. This body, made of matter, made of organic stuff. If I am mind, that's also easy to understand what the mind is, because there are thoughts, emotions, ideas, personality. I'm a person. But if I'm not the body-mind, then what am I? What am I made of? And the answer is, it sounds very abstract, but it's continuously felt by all of us. What we are made of, what we are, is existence awareness. First thing is, whatever I am, I exist. This was Descartes' the result which he got through his philosophical investigations, meditations. The great French mathematician Descartes. We don't know much about his philosophy, but we have all learnt mathematics in school, the Cartesian coordinates, that same Descartes. He set out to doubt whatever could be doubted, the Descartesian skepticism. And he found there's only one thing that cannot be doubted, my own existence. Because even to doubt one's own existence, one has to think, do I exist or don't I exist? So I'm thinking, that which is thinking definitely exists. Even to doubt yourself, you have to exist. So, as Shankaracharya says, ya eva tasya nirakarta tasya eva atmasa. Whoever doubts the existence of the self, it's the self of that very doubter. I exist. Descartes' conclusion, cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I exist. It need not be just I think. I speak, therefore I exist. I write, therefore I exist. I enjoy, I suffer, therefore I exist. Any conscious experience proves to me that I exist. So who am I, what am I? First of all, I am existence. I exist. And second, I am aware. How do you know that? Because I'm experiencing. Since I'm experiencing, I must be aware. And Vedanta generalizes that to say, what you are, what we are, what all of us are, the subject, the self, is existence awareness. It is, and it shines. The same thing can be arrived at by the method of the Panchakosha Viveka, which is from the Taittiriya Upanishad. You start with the body, and then we are drawn to see why we are not the body. The body is ever changing, I am not changing. The body is an object, I am the subject. The body is not conscious, I am conscious, and so on. So I cannot be the body. And the body is called the food sheet, Annamaya Atma or Annamaya Kosha. And then we go more and more subtle levels. Subtler than the body is the breath. The prana, of which the breath is just the tip of the iceberg. And that also I am not, for reasons which will be shown to us. And then subtler than that is the mind, that also I am not. Subtler than that is the intellect, which I am using now to understand all this, that also I am not. Subtler than that is the blankness. If you dismiss the world, dismiss the body, dismiss the prana, mind, intellect, senses, you'll end up with a blank. That blank also I am not. So Pancha Kosha Vilakshanatma, yet I exist. So I am not the Annamaya, Pranamaya, Manomaya, Vijnanamaya, Anandamaya. The food sheet, the vital sheet, the mental sheet, the intellect sheet, and the bliss sheet. They're sheets like coverings. Coverings of what? Myself. And what am I? Well, I exist and I'm aware. Therefore I am existence awareness. Satchit. And the same thing is arrived at by the method of the Avasthatraya, which you find in different Upanishads, especially in the Mandukya Upanishad. Here we are awake, hopefully. Vedanta is often very soporific. So here we are awake. And I am this person, I am the waker, this is the world of my waking. He said, no Swami, you are Sarvapriyananda. Yes, I am Sarvapriyananda, you are Mr. X, you are Miss Y, and so on. But all of us, we are awake right now. So let's give us a general term, name. We are waker. We are awake. And we experience a world which we inhabit. Here is this beautiful hall, and there's the people around, the seat I'm sitting on. This is my waking world. But this is not the only state we experience. At one time we do fall asleep. Afternoon siesta or at night or middle of the class siesta. And then we dream. We dream. And in the dream there is a virtual world which we don't know is a virtual world. When we wake up we realize it's a world of dreams. And I am there in that world too. I'm doing stuff there. When I wake up it was all in the mind. Oh, it was only a dream. But I am the dreamer and there's a dream world. However temporary, however flimsy it seems to be. And there is a third stage, broadly speaking. There is deep sleep, where I'm not aware of the world, I'm not aware of dreams, I'm not even aware that I am sleeping. Blank, an utter blankness. Which can get even deeper, in coma, in anesthesia. So these are the three states. But what Vedanta points out is, all of them happen to us. It's to you. You are the one who wakes and experiences this world. You are the one who sleeps and experiences a dream. You are the one who goes into a deep sleep of blankness. Who are you? And there's a method of analysis for that. And we realize, I am awareness, I am existence. I am existence awareness. Same result. All of this is to say, Shankaracharya's assume, we all know this. We all know this. We are awareness. We are existence. But now the question comes. What is all this? What is the universe? What is it in relationship to me? See, when we say I am awareness and these are all objects, body is also an object. Mind is also object. In that case, it's not non-duality. It's not Advaita. It is absolutely dualistic. It is the Sankhyan dualism of consciousness and Jada, the Chetana and Jada, consciousness and matter, spirit and matter, of consciousness and the material universe. This is Sankhyan. The Sankhyan kind of worldview, self-view and worldview. It's not non-dualistic. There are two. You are there and everything else is there. Even now we have that worldview. Only thing is right now we are identified with part of the material world, this body. I am this one, everything else is other than me. Still dualistic. What this analysis has done is it has shown me that I am really awareness, I am existence, and everything else is apart from me, appears to me. Now Advaita asks this question. This is where the verse starts. The Dakshinamurti Stotra starts. It asks this question. What is this other? You say it is drishya. It is something that is experienced. Is it apart from you? Is it imagined in you? Is it distinct from you or is it you? What is the relationship between you and the world? Between consciousness and its objects? This is the question. And this is where Shankaracharya starts. Usually a Vedanta text will always start with Viveka, body, I'm not the body, not the mind. Like Nirvana Shatakam, Manovadhyahankara Chittani Naham. Then only it will come to Chidananda Rupa Shivoham. But here it starts with the end, with the final result. What Advaita Vedanta wants to say. So he says, yes, you are aware, you are drashta, consciousness. Yes, you are the Pancha Kosha Vilakshana Atma, the witness consciousness of the 5 sheets of the body-mind. Yes, you are the witness of the 3 states, the Turiya, the 4th, which witnesses the waking and the waker's world, the dreaming and the dreamer's world, and the deep sleep experience. All of them are witnessed by a 4th one, which is called Turiya. Yes, you are Turiya, your consciousness. But what is this drishya, this physical world? What are the Pancha Kosha and external world? What is the waking world, dream world, and deep sleep world? What are these other beings? What are they to you? Advaita Vedanta says, wait for it, this is the stunning conclusion. First, already one, what Swami Ranganathan used to call truth bombs, Vedantic truth bombs. First, already one devastating thing has been said to us. We are not what we thought we were. We are awareness, not this mortal body which is born, ages and dies. Your awareness, not born, does not age, does not die. Not even this fickle mind which thinks, feels, imagines, fancies, suffers, desires. We are the witness of that also. We are not that. We are with this pure consciousness. That's the first truth bomb. Devastating. Total, radical change in our idea of concept. And Sankhya philosophy, Yoga philosophy, they consider that this is enough for your liberation. If you realize this, it's done. But Advaita goes further. Advaita now asks this question, that to which all of this appears, that all, so-called all, the drishya of the drashta, the Panchakosha of the Panchakosha Vilakshana Atma, the 3 states of waking, dreaming, deep sleep, the waking world, the dream world, the deep sleep state, they are all nothing but you, the pure consciousness. You, the limitless awareness, you, the existence consciousness, you are appearing to yourself as object. You are appearing to yourself as your universe. Therefore, it is not distinct. This world is not distinct from you. The result of the Dakshinamurti Stotra, at the very end, he will say, what do you get out of all of this? Sarvatma Bhava. The one being, which is the self of all beings. The whole universe is one with you. You are one with the entire universe. That is what is going to be established. So this is non-duality. There is no second reality. There is only one reality. What is that reality? That reality you are. Tattvamasi. You are that reality. The whole of Advaita Vedanta, Brahma Satyam Jagat Mithya Jiva Brahmaiva Napara. That existence awareness is the only reality. This world is an appearance of that existence awareness. Alright, great. What about me? You are that existence awareness. Brahman is real. The world is an appearance. And you, we, the sentient beings, we are Brahman. Not parts of it. Not devotees of it. But it, you can say whole of it, although there is no whole and part relationship there. You are, each one of us, is the entire ocean. Let's put it that way. Okay. How does he accomplish this? In a very beautiful, elegant and poetic way. We'll look into it. He uses, Adi Shankaracharya uses, two examples. One is the very poetic, elegant mirror example, city in the mirror example. The other one is the favorite of Advaitins, the dream, not snake road, dream example. Darpana Drishtanta, Swapna Drishtanta. Dream example, mirror example. Now, what I will do next is, I will explain the example. This is how Shankaracharya's strategy. He leverages the examples in order to give us non-dual realization, understanding at least. So I will take up each example and explain non-duality with the help of each example. Mirror example first, dream example next. And then we will see what is the point of it, what benefit does it give us, how is non-duality established. These examples work beautifully. When I give examples, when any examples are used anywhere, especially in Vedanta, metaphors, similes, they are all meant to prove something or demonstrate something or state something. Not prove exactly, but to demonstrate some point, and depends on the skill of the teacher to bring out that point. So when you say, don't extend the example unnecessarily. When you say, the universe is like a city seen in a mirror. So, oh, the mirror is made of glass, so the ultimate reality must be glass. No. Don't stretch the example. It may be a glass mirror, a titanium mirror, it may be whatever. A steel mirror. It doesn't matter. That's not the point of the example. So the point of the example has to be understood carefully. And then we will apply it to Advaita Vedanta, to our life. So that's what we're going to do. Two examples, apply it to our life, realize Advaita, at least understand Advaita Vedanta, and see how it is true. And see what is the benefit, straight away. Vishwam Darpana Drishyamana Nagari Tulyam. The entire universe is like that city, Bhuvaneshwar, the city, seen in the mirror. Now immediately he says, he knows what's in our minds. Yeah, if you see a city in the mirror, the city is out there. And it is seen in the mirror. So there is actually a city out there. He immediately says, Nijantargatam. Imagine a mirror in which there's a reflection, but there's nothing outside which is reflected. It's difficult for people at that time. For us, it's very easy. We call it a computer screen. We call it a laptop screen, a television screen. He didn't have it in those days, so he had to use a mirror example. So, nothing outside. You can easily see a city on your laptop. And you don't think there's a city behind you in the laptop. The screen is producing that image. So imagine the mirror, there's a city seen in it, no city outside. Forget the city outside, otherwise you'll keep getting confused, like this person here. The universe is like a city reflected in the mirror, seen inside the mirror, but really outside of it. No. You have to completely forget that. The whole of Advaita will fall flat right here, if we explain it that way. So, there's no city outside the mirror, even if there is, we are not considering that. For our example, we are just taking the mirror in which you are seeing the city. Just take that much. Now notice this about the example, city in the mirror. Notice that wherever the reflected city is there the mirror must be. Just repeat. Wherever you see the reflected city, if you see a building, the mirror must be there. If you see a street, the mirror must be there. If you see a tree, a sky, the birds flying around, the mirror must be there. You can't have a reflection without the mirror. Are you following this much? Wherever you see the reflected city, there the mirror must be right there. Whenever you see a reflection, then only the mirror must be there. Wherever and whenever. Rishis said, philosophically, they will say, the mirror pervades the reflection. This technically then you will call the mirror is the ground of the reflection, is the adhisthana of the reflection, is the basis, the support of the reflection. Can we put it that way? Yes. Now, applied to this word, what Shankara is saying here is, whatever we consider to be the world of our experience, whatever we experience, whenever we experience, the experiencing consciousness must be there. Think about it. The world appears and exists in consciousness. Whenever the world is there, consciousness is there. Wherever the world is there, consciousness is there. Consciousness is the ground of this world, the ground of the world appearance. This is not intuitive. This is not intuitive. Let me give you a counter, like a pushback against this. Then you will begin to understand what a huge claim, at least philosophically, what a huge claim is being made here. When I say this, that consciousness is the ground of the universe. Consciousness, the universe appears in consciousness, like the city in the mirror, like the world of our dreams in the mind. We have our senior-most member in the Vedanta Society. On Wednesday, he became 100 years old. Bill Conrad, he's 100 years old. And he's been in Vedanta since 1955. As a disciple of Swami Pavitranandaji in New York. So he said, no, Swami, the world exists, and then we as conscious beings, we come and see it. And I'll prove it to you. How? It's not that the world exists in me, in my consciousness. I'll prove it to you. We'll put a camera in this room, and the camera will take pictures, and we will leave this room, no conscious being in the room, the camera is taking pictures, we will come back into the room, and I will show you the pictures in the camera, which will show you an empty room without any conscious beings. The room exists. No conscious being is there. So how do you explain that? The universe exists. There are stars and galaxies out there of which we know nothing. Right now only far side of the moon is being explored. The Indian spacecraft, now the Chinese spacecraft. There's so many things of which we know nothing. They're outside our consciousness. In fact, what we know is very little. It's only a tiny bit. Right now I can see you. I can't even see what's behind. Now I can see what's behind, but I can't see you. So consciousness, how much is there in our consciousness? Very little. You can't see universes in consciousness. And right here, you don't have to go to far-off galaxies. Right here, right now, there are tiny particles, there are germs which we don't know anything about. How is it in your consciousness? Your own body, inside the body, what's going on there? How is it in your consciousness? The material universe exists, and your consciousness comes and becomes aware of it in some form or the other. That's all. That is his claim. And this is the proof. What is the answer? I said, Bill, in your own consciousness, in your own awareness, you set up this experiment. In your own awareness, you invited me to leave the room. And we left the room. Now we can't see the room anymore. In your own awareness, you came back into this room. In consciousness, in awareness, came back into the room. And you switched on the camera and saw the pictures in your awareness. And what did you see? Empty room without any human beings. In your own awareness. At which point did you leave awareness? Or is it even possible to leave awareness? Certainly what the difference is being made, what Vedanta does is makes a very subtle move. It distinguishes between consciousness and knowledge. Consciousness is global. Every universe you have experienced in consciousness. The very word, it's actually a triviality. But you will say experienced, already consciousness is there. Anyway, this is something to keep in mind. This is how Vedanta claims. Vedanta does not mean that you know everything in the universe at the same time. No. It means When you say something is in consciousness, it means life happens in consciousness. Our known and unknown, knowledge and ignorance, they are in consciousness. Where else? So it's in a very vast, immersive sense that we are using the word consciousness. All right. Vishwam darpana drishyamana nagari tulyam. Consciousness is the ground of the world appearance, just as mirror is the ground of the reflection. Comparison okay so far? No. This is just the beginning. If you're looking doubtful here. All right, we'll be brave and plow on. Second. Notice, mirror, city in the mirror. But there is no city in the mirror. Example, city in the mirror. There is no city in the mirror. If you see in the mirror, you see buildings and cars and gardens and people walking around. But if you go to the mirror, are there buildings in the mirror? There is only glass. Are there roads in the mirror? Can you drive in the mirror? No. Are there people in the mirror? No. It looks like that, but there's no people. It's just glass. Is there sky and river and dogs and birds in the mirror? Not at all. It's just glass. True and true. In fact, in the mirror, there is not even the slightest space for anything else. It is glass and only glass. One sadhu in Uttarakhand would say, "Thasathas bharpur jyokatyo." This universe, so-called universe, is packed tight with consciousness. There is no space for any universe. Just like in a mirror, there is no space for anything. In fact, if the mirror gives a gap, a space, reflection will disappear. So when the entire city appears in the mirror, there is nothing in the mirror. There are no people in the mirror, no buildings in the mirror, no activities in the mirror, just glass, and it looks like that. Okay so far? Then can we say mirror is the reality, reflection is the appearance? Mirror, can we say that? That's what we think. Don't we say it's only a reflection? So what do you mean? It's actually a mirror and the city is only a reflection. Whatever you see is only a reflection. So can we say mirror real, city false, reflected city false, mirror real, reflected city false, mirror satyam, nagari, pratibimba nagari, reflected city, mithya. In the same way, what appears in consciousness is nothing apart from consciousness. The claim is there are no real buildings and stocks and stones and people and dogs and cats and worlds, universes in consciousness. If you look at it that way, it's illogical. These are appearances in consciousness. So consciousness real, Brahman real, the world, the universe appearing in consciousness is just that, an appearance. A famous philosopher, Bradley, was a British idealist philosopher in late 19th century, early 20th century in Cambridge, or Oxford, Cambridge. He used to say, reality, appearance is never real, reality never appears. He's playing on the two meanings of the word appearance. What is appearing? So this is appearing. Then it cannot be real. What is real will never appear to you. Because you are that reality. How will you appear to yourself? Whatever appears to you is other than you, but also not other than you. You only are appearing to yourself in this way. This universe. So, the great conclusion is Brahma Satyam Jagat Mithya. The entire world of the Drishya, the entire world of the Panchakosha, five levels of human personality, the entire world of the waking, the entire world, dream worlds, and the darkness of deep sleep, they all are appearances in you. They are not realities by themselves. This is what has been developed in first in Buddhism as interdependence, pratitya samudaya, deeper in Vedanta as Maya and so on. Brahma Satyam Jagat Mithya. Consciousness is the reality and appearance is appearance. The very word appearance. Something appears to be real. The language, what does it mean? If it appears to be real, what are you trying to say? It's not real. Third, one more. Let's go further into it. appearance never affects the reality. Appearance never affects the reality. Shankaracharya says in one of his commentaries, all the water in a mirage is not enough to wet one grain of sand. Mirage water, there's no water there. Like an oasis, it looks like that. Looks like water, shimmering. But if you go there, no water. Not only that, all that water in the so-called oasis is not enough. One grain of sand also will not be wet. Why? Why not so much water is there? Because there's no water. It looks like that. It appears like that. The appearance is a different level of truth, a lower level of truth, and the or more surface level of truth, and the reality is a deeper level of truth. It's actually a desert. It's not water, but it looks like water. That's why it's called a mirage. Mirage water cannot wet the sand of the real desert. Similarly, whatever happens in the city, in the mirror, cannot affect the mirror. Suppose there is an explosion in the reflected city. Will the mirror burn up? No. Suppose there is a flood in the city, reflected city. Will the mirror get wet? No. Suppose there is an earthquake in the reflected city. Will the mirror crack? No. Similarly, you, the one consciousness in which the universe is appearing, remember, body also, mind also, whatever happens in the universe, body, mind, has no effect on you. They depend on you for their existence, but you don't depend on them. They depend on you for all their activity. And it's called Satta Spurana. But that activity will not affect you, the ground of that, the reality of that appearance. You're completely detached from the world appearance. It doesn't affect you. You'll be fine. In fact, there's one thing that has happened in all our lifetimes, from our babyhood, birth till now. So many things have come and gone. But one thing is there, you are still here. And our religion says we have gone through many lifetimes like this. How many deaths we have suffered? We may have suffered accidents, whatnot, catastrophes. Whatever has happened, maybe cities and empires have dissolved. Maybe worlds have disappeared. Why? Maybe they have. But one thing remains. You are still here. Nothing can destroy you, your existence. Your existence nature, your awareness nature, nothing can mar it, scar it, fracture it, destroy it. You're indestructible, immortal. Nothing can taint it. Sin cannot taint you. Not that any kind of good or meritorious deeds will elevate you. It will affect the mind, but it will not affect you, the existence awareness. You are free of it all. But the appearance, the universe is not free of the city is not free of the mirror. City cannot exist without the mirror. If you actually damage the mirror, city will go. Similarly, this universe is not free of you. The universe depends on you. We think we are tiny little creatures dependent on this whole universe. As bodies we are, certainly. If there is no air, we will suffocate and die. If there is no water, we will die of thirst. No food, we will die of hunger. A little germ can come and affect this body and COVID and kill us. As bodies, we are very, very vulnerable. There will be birth and aging and disease and death. As minds, we are even more vulnerable. Vivekananda says, slave to a good word, slave to a bad word. The slightest of change of behavior in others can throw us into depression. Minds are so shaky. Little change in the world outside, mind becomes very shaky. But you are not the body, not the mind. You are the awareness, witness awareness of this existence awareness, witness of this body mind. You are not affected. Vedanta wants us to shift from this body mind awareness identity to this witness existence consciousness, the Sakshi. Then I can say Chidananda Rupa Shivoham Shivoham. So, finally, one more point. Further, if we go further, this is the most profound point. The city in the mirror and the mirror are non-dual. In the mirror, when you see the city, what do you see? Oh, so many buildings and cars and sky and earth. But if you say it's the mirror, what more do you see? What more reality is there apart from the mirror? Apart from the mirror, nothing. Because the so-called city and people and sky and earth, everything that you see in the mirror is nothing but the mirror. If you say there is a mirror and there are 10 buildings, no. There is a mirror and 10 buildings are appearing in the mirror, not distinguished from the mirror. You cannot count 10 buildings are there and one mirror is there, 11 are there. No, 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 no. The moment you count the mirror, the 10 are included in it, and not even included in it, there are appearances in it. All the buildings, all the people, all the cars and trees and everything in that reflected city are not a countably second entity apart from the mirror. If you have clay and you make a pot out of it, then you make a jar out of it, or you make something out of it, all the things that you make from that clay are not countably apart from that clay. Countably apart means you can't say, I can count, here is a bottle, here is a book, and here is a table. I think it's a plastic table. Yes. Here's a table. I can count them. Here is one bottle, one book, one table, 3 are there. But suppose I say there is plastic and there is a table. No, you can't do that. Because the table is made of that plastic. If there are 100, or there are like 200 seats here, they're made of wood. If I say how many seats? 200. Can I say there is wood plus 200 seats? No, 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 no. If you count the wood, there's only one. If you go through the ocean and you see thousands of waves, you try to count the waves, don't. But if you do try to count the waves and you count thousands, but if you count water, then you cannot say there is water plus 1,000 waves. No. All those waves are nothing but that water. Similarly, the city in the mirror is nothing but the mirror. Therefore, mirror and city Advaita. The mirror is non-dual with respect to the reflected city. I repeat, the mirror is non-dual with respect to the reflected city. There is no two there. We cannot count two. Similarly, you, the one consciousness in which the universe appears, you are non-dual with respect to the universe. If you count the stuff in the universe, you take a census. Oh, there are 200 seats here and 150 people here, and there is the ceiling and the lights. But if you say one consciousness in which it appears, then all of this is nothing other than an appearance in that consciousness. It's not that there is a hall and there is a people and the chairs plus consciousness. No. If you say consciousness, this is all like a mirror, sitting in a mirror, this is all appearing in consciousness. That consciousness you are. So that consciousness is non-dual with respect to the world. Remember, when we say non-dual, it's not that there is a city, there is a mirror, and they somehow come together, it is one now, it's non-dual. No, no, no. We mean there is only the mirror. Mary Hale, she wrote to Swami Vivekananda, in a poem, I have understood what you have taught. All is God. And Swami Vivekananda wrote back another poem saying that I have never taught such strange teachings. Such a strange doctrine that all is God. So what I meant was only God is, all is not. It's not that there is a city and all of it is glass. No, 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 no. There's a city made of glass. No, no, no. There is only the mirror. The city is not, though it appears. Nama, Rupa, Vyavahara. Yes, we will see all the people. You can interact with them. Everything will go on as usual. Everything will remain. When you go out, there will be the car and it will be wet because it rained. All of it is true. That will come. But from the perspective of the one consciousness, they are all appearances in that one consciousness. As that one consciousness, we are that, you are that, Tattvamasi. You are non-dual, Advaitam. That is mirror Advaitam. This is Atma Advaitam, self-Advaitam. The non-duality of the consciousness, non-duality of the self. You are non-dual. Alright, this is the mirror example and Advaita example. To strengthen that in our minds, mirror example and universe example. To strengthen that in our minds, gives one more example. Dream is yatha nidraya. As in a dream. What happens in a dream? We fall asleep, we forget the bedroom, we forget our body, we forget that we are dreaming, and a new world suddenly comes up. And there are people There are acquaintances. I am also there. When I look, I have got a body and I don't remember that I'm dreaming. It feels like a waking experience. And I go and walk around there and experience stuff. And I say, oh, it was only a dream. That's a dream. Now he says, apply that. Notice, in a dream, you the waker, your mind, the dreamer's mind, you the waker, the one who fell asleep, your mind is the basis of the dream. Just like mirror is basis for the city. Just as your mind is the basis of the dream, the entire dream is projected in your mind when you fall asleep. Similarly, consciousness is the basis of this universe. Same thing I'm saying. Whatever I did with the city in the mirror, now I'm repeating for dream example. Just as the whole dream world was based, grounded in, supported by you, the dreaming mind. Similarly, this whole universe right now is based on, grounded in, supported by Adhisthana, in you, the consciousness. The second thing which we saw, the appearance is false. The ground of that appearance is real. Also the features, you see, notice, in the dream world, wherever you go in the dream world, it's actually the dreaming mind only. Are you with me? The dreaming mind. So wherever you go in the dream world, the entire dream world is pervaded by one thing, the dreaming mind, though you don't see it. Wherever you go in your dream, you will see that it is actually your mind only. Whenever there is a dream, the mind must be there. So time and space in the dream is pervaded by the dreaming mind. Similarly here, time and space here are all pervaded by you, the one consciousness. Whenever there is, it sounds like a song. Whenever there is this world of conscious experience, there is consciousness, the ground of that. Then go further. The appearance is not real. The reality never appears. So, the dream is not real. Because we wake up and say it was a dream, nothing but a dream. But what is real for us after waking up? Oh, this waking world is real. I, the one who woke up, I am real. So, in the consciousness is real. Atman is real. The self is real. And the projected, experienced world, and that is not real. Brahma Satyam Jagat Mithya. Same analysis. And then remember, the false, the appearance, the mithya cannot affect the Satyam, the real. Just as the city in the mirror cannot affect the mirror, things in the dream cannot affect you, the dreamer. The one who has woken up from the dream, they don't affect you. Whatever happened in the dream does not affect you. You've woken up. Similarly, you, the one consciousness, you're not affected by what appears, the universe which appears in the consciousness. Neither the world, nor the body, nor the mind. You're completely free of it, even while it's appearing. Just as the mirror is completely free of the city, even while the city is appearing. And final point, we're just going to end. Non-duality. Think. In the dream, suppose you met many people, you went to many places, you had tea or coffee, which you're going to have now, and all of that you did. But when you wake up, you realize all of that, all the people, including my own body in the dream, and the places I went to, and the food and drink which I had, they're nothing other than the mind which was dreaming. The mind alone projected all of them. They are not a second reality. I give this example. You know, sweet laddu, or let's use a more common thing here. Cookie. Suppose I have a cookie and I like it. And then I go fall asleep and I dream about it and I have 3 more cookies in my dream. When I wake up, will I say I've had 4 cookies? 1 when I was awake and 3 more in my dream? No, you don't say that. You cannot count the dream cookies and hang on. Similarly, whatever appears in consciousness is not counted along with consciousness. They do not constitute a countable second apart from consciousness. So consciousness is non-dual with respect to all the appearances in consciousness. Ekam eva advitiyam. One consciousness alone without a second. Non-duality of consciousness. Just like non-duality of the mirror with respect to city, non-duality of the dreamer with respect to the contents of the dream, non-duality of consciousness with respect to universe. Now, just take a look at the verse. All of this, I was just explaining the verse. Let's take a look. Vishwam darpana drishyamana nagari tulyam nijantargatam. Entire universe is like a city reflected in the mirror, not outside. Pashyan atmani mayaya. Universe is seen in the Atman, in the self, in consciousness. Why? Through Maya. You might ask, why at all? Why does it appear? Through Maya. More will be explained later on. As if outside. Bahiriva udbhutam. Just yatha nidraya. As in a dream, I feel the world of the dream is outside. And I am walking around and talking with people there. When I wake up, I feel the whole thing was in my head. So exactly in the same way. It seems I am here, you are all there. It's all outside. How can I be all pervading? I love this, in Uttarakhand, when this was going on. You are all pervading. Sarva Vyapi Chaitanya. You are all pervading consciousness. Somebody in the back row, a monk, said, Thairiya Mahatmaji, wait a minute, monk. Oh, monk, wait a minute. I am here and you are there. How can I be everywhere? I am here. I am not even there. I am here. I am not even here. How can I be everywhere? मैं यहाँ हूँ, वहाँ नहीं हूँ, so सर्वव्यापी कैसे हुआ? And the answer was so beautiful. The monk said, the teacher said, यहाँ और वहाँ, क्या ये दोनों ही आप में नहीं है? This very idea of here and there, are they not both in consciousness? If you are in the body, certainly body is here and it's not there. But in awareness, something is here and something is there. Both are in awareness. To understand that, dream example is beautiful. In the dream you stand, here is the park, Central Park, and behind is the background of Manhattan. Here is the park, there is Manhattan skyline. Here and there. But when I wake up, sit on my bed, and I realize, here Central Park, there Manhattan, here and there, both were here. Similarly, in one consciousness appears space and time and causality. Yas sakshat kurute prabodha swasamaye swatmanamevatoyam. How beautiful. When you wake up, you realize I am the non-dual waker with respect to the dream. When you become enlightened, you realize I am the non-dual Atman with respect to the universe. Don't look puzzled, we all explained it now. And then, to that non-dual Atman, that's me, which is my own reality, the reality of this universe, in which the whole universe is appearing, I salute. How? Tasmai Shri Guru Murtaye Namaidam Shri Dakshinamurtaye. That is Dakshinamurti, the ultimate reality of the universe, the non-dual existence consciousness bliss. That itself is the south-facing Shiva, who is giving us knowledge. And that knowledge is embodied in the gracious form of the Guru, who is teaching us. Shri Guru Murtaye, in the form of the Guru. Who is that? Non-dual consciousness. In the form of Dakshinamurti, who is that? Non-dual consciousness. In the form of this fellow, who is this? Non-dual consciousness. I salute this amazing, amazing thing. This extraordinary reality, which is my own reality. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat Shri Ram Krishna